Hi, welcome to another session of On Art Conversations with the Artists. We are happy to be joined by Jenna Lucente, one of the curators of Through a Glass Darkly, and exhibiting artist David King. Thank you guys for taking the time out to join us and just to sit with our audience a little bit and share in depth about the work that is on display in the lobby. And as well as the work that is taking over 6,000 square feet of the museum. So we're really excited to hear from both Jenna and David.
Well, thank you so much, Josh, for having us. And I think it's always great to get a little bit behind the scenes with the artist. So, David, we have your wonderful pieces in the lobby, and I'm so happy to have your work in the show. But I think the question that me personally, that I have for you is not just how did you become an artist, but how did you find glass? Because I know when I was in high school, I did art and I went to college for art, but like I never came across glass until significantly later in my life. So I'm just wondering like a little bit about like how you got interested in art, but then where did you find glass? Or how did it find you?
I understand. Well, first, I'd like to say, thanks, Josh, for having us, and thanks, Jenna, for doing this with me. So I found glass. I found glass in college. I was I was taking art classes. I think I was going to be, just get a BA, a bachelor's degree in art, and I happened upon a class, like the instructor in a previous class, and signed up. And actually, that instructor switched out, and I had somebody different. But I really just fell in love with it from day one, the sort of the glass blowing process. But a lot of my work also, and my work now, is involves cold glass and sort of a slower process, a more meticulous process. So I think glass just offered a lot of sort of technical discipline based um, challenges that just really appealed to me. And then, it's kind of not only a beautiful medium, but I think a medium that can carry a lot of different meanings already has this inherent um, uh, sort of all these physical properties that carry an inherent meaning or connection to contemporary life. So all that I found appealing, and but I found it in college. I happened to go to Ohio State where they had classes in a program, and I find myself back there in that same program teaching currently. So it's sort of a full circle moment starting this year for me.
You have to love those full circle moments.
Yeah,
So, the influence that someone had on you, you may have on someone else. And that's kind of amazing to think about. And I'm so glad that you did find glass because it seems like, a very elusive medium that not everyone has access to. So,
yes, indeed. And I think trying to make it accessible, not just make it accessible to all sorts of folks from different backgrounds is a goal, is a mission.
mhm.
But also make the work, make the understanding, maybe make it an access point for grappling with deeper ideas about how contemporary art functions. I
Yeah,
know it was that for me, and I think it can be for other folks. I think when we talk about my work a little bit, um, I'll hopefully be able to touch on how I'm really interested in sort of universal appeal, and um, try to create visual imagery that is really attractive to everybody, but maybe can um, can be understood in a number of different ways as well.
yeah. I think on that topic, this might be a good time to start sharing your screen and taking us through some of those works that have a story behind them and maybe
Sure.
talk about your relationship to glass and that story and that meaning.
Okay, so these two images I just brought up in this sort of title screen are on the right is a very well organized picture of my studio, the common tools I use, and then on the left a little bit of my inspiration, or sort of a process picture of me documenting some refracted light, which becomes an important part of my work. Hmm? let's see what happens here. Oh, there you go. So this is work that's about, let's say, over 10 years old now. But it was a really important moment for me where I realized that this sort of intimate and meticulous craft gesture, this like piercing with a diamond bit, drilling these holes in this is just a everyday beer bottle, that this sort of, this interaction between the craft gesture and this everyday object had this certain kind of power, and this image really was important, or an important moment. Not only an object to be made, but sort of an image that went out into the world. Seemed to resonate with people as it resonated with me. And this idea of the bottle as again, a recognizable, accessible object, but recreating it, treating it as a sort of a template to explore different material ideas. In this case, using security glass, industrially made security glass, to replicate in a sort of futile way this bottle form. I got an opportunity to do a residency at the National Glass Center at the University of Sunderland, and they had this technology to make float glass, window glass, and water jet cut it. And this process, these kind of objects, these waffled objects, was a common solution to using that technology by artists. So I was hand blowing these bottles that were sort of trying to mimic industrially made bottles, and that became my reference point to create the waffled object. Here it's being brought into a digital space. I have this relationship with technology where I'm a little suspicious of the ease or the need to incorporate technology into a craft discipline. And this is a traditional way to make sheet glass. So here, making a bubble, stretching it and turning it into a cylinder. So I use this method. It's called the blown cylinder method of making sheet glass, a traditional method that goes back 150 years. But here I'm making the cylinder and then flattening it out into a sheet. And then I use that sheet of handmade glass to sort of insert into this relatively straightforward process of waffling an object. This made this sort of slowed down the process. It circumvented the ease of the technology. So here on the right, a technician is having to go into the program and make these little adjustments to the notches that help that glass interlock. And here you get, you see how I've sort of balanced that so the object's weightier towards the bottom. This process of making, here's all of the objects and how I sort of displayed this work at the time, called this anatomy of a waffle bottle. But this process of this approach to making a process more difficult, or embracing the challenge of a process, is sort of a common, or a typical approach of mine. I saw this GIF of a cat running up a slide, and was thinking about the image on the left, Titian's painting of Sisyphus. I also thought about this series of images, art history, Edward Muybridge's recording of Sally Gardner in a full gallop, kind of test to see if a horse's hooves left the ground during a full gallop. Etienne Mouret was a French physiologist who first proposed this idea about or this question about the horse's hooves, and whether you could ever be able to capture that motion. He was later influenced by Muybridge to produce images like this. recording instances of animal locomotion. So I made this work in response to sort of that amalgamation of influences. And this is my own zoetrope. It's a stroboscopic zoetrope. Zoetropes are early or a pre-cinematic device to resolve still images into a moving image. This one is these series of images that are then projected through a water lens, a blown water lens, to recreate that that internet GIF of the cat on the slide. My work with projected light goes back to this moment. Again, this is a little over 10 years ago, thinking about glass and glass materiality, using the light from the sun to project through a prism, in this case, a float glass and water prism, to create the full spectrum of light. Playing with this in that space, I made this, cut out this silhouette of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, an early color theorist, among many other things, but wrote a book on color where he was the first to identify psychological influences of color. I recreated his portrait in this sculpture. This sculpture is utilizing this idea of anamorphism, where the reflection of the color on the back of the frame is specifically angled in these mirrors on the board to create, this video is gonna, okay, so from one particular point of view, it sort of resolves into you know, an enlarged version of that photograph portrait. See there, the glass has been cut out. A lot of my sculptures are about, are often resolved from a single point of view, or sort of about perspective or perception, or a combination of those two things. The use of the full spectrum of light, I think, also has to do with these ideas about optics. These early experiments really, more than anything, influenced me to begin collecting color, thinking about the color pulled out of the sunlight as this kind of found color, and then turning to pulling it out of my recycling bin, in this case, again, using these water-filled lenses with cut up cardboard, colored cardboard underneath. So my recycling bin becomes a source for this found and collected material. Getting over the years a little bit more sophisticated with the way I organize these things, using traditional stained glass methods, cutting sheet glass, creating these boxes to house these collections. That really started with this set of objects where I just had these sort of kicking around the studio, and wanted to figure out some way to display them, have them be a little bit more permanent. So I made this fairly straightforward glass box, called this piece Light. And then, you know, some of these objects just presented themselves to me as just these really sort of fascinating moments of, you know, both color, but also, you know, they serve a purpose. Maybe these are mostly single-use plastic, but in this way of giving them these very special homes, these display mechanisms, thinking, you know, from my perspective, a little bit more deeply about where they came from, the kind of engineering that it took to produce these things. These are like on the continuum of containers that, you know, glass was typically the material from a previous time used for containers now that has evolved into plastic. This plastic has gotten quite sophisticated. So, kind of this hopefully this conversation a little bit between the two materials. Also, presenting myself with these pretty complex challenges of creating this sort of lower resolution geometry around these shapes. This is a shampoo bottle that was squeezed really aggressively, and so it retained this sort of seam or this dent in it. So I kind of addressed that in the way it was encased. I call this series the Echo. I was actually given an assignment that was very similar to this as an undergrad in college, and a lot of my choices come from thinking about that time when I was learning about the basics or the fundamentals, the foundations of an art practice. A lot of these things I think refer to sort of assisted ready-mades, surrealist objects, Dada, sort of well-trodden art art styles from.
Well, I think as you're talking, David, and talking about that some of these are ideas that even were from undergrad, but maybe took 10 years to fully realize or percolate, it
Sure.
really goes into the artist's mind. Because I think a lot of people think that artists like wake up in the morning and suddenly have this amazing idea. And they may not realize that it's actually, I would say, the cumulative knowledge over years and practice and study that then can present itself as an amazing idea, but it's not out of nowhere. It comes from some kind of heritage in your brain. And that's sort of what we're hearing you talk about.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think in putting this together, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is not being shown. There's a lot of work that is worth being shown, but maybe I don't have time for. But these are things that I think sort of inform each other or sort of inform the timeline. But absolutely, in a way, I've been making pretty much the same thing over and over again, or we'll sort of zoom in on something and focus on it, but then zoom back out. So sort of like maybe the bigger pieces, the bigger installations, or like the full spectrum pieces are one thing and maybe take years to develop, or like that the zoetrope took years to develop, and that was sort of a flash of inspiration, but it was based on like several other works that were developed that before that were developing ideas about moving images and like cycles, and the other thing is you'll notice a lot of these things are sort of circles or in the round in some sort of way, if not color wheels. So I kind of make color wheels over and over again. So yeah, but yeah, I kind of can't get away from repeating myself in some ways, and I think most people do. But then it's like kind of within those constraints that I think both for myself and hopefully for people who maybe have seen a series of works by me, like might appreciate sort of like, oh, like that's a interesting next step. I thought this was an interesting next step. We found this. This is a plastic goblet. I think we found it at a thrift store for $1 or something, and one of the more complex encasements.
And I think people who are viewing this talk may not realize that what they're seeing is a lot of what you referred to earlier in this discussion is cold working, where you're taking glass, you're cutting it, you're gluing it together. Is that a correct description of the process?
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk about the process a little bit, but yeah, essentially I'm using stained glass techniques, and so nothing too complex. I did talk about water jet cutting, but these things we're looking at now are not cut by a machine, like in cases where a wrong cut is made. I just cut it over. So I am using the sort of like in today's world antiquated processes, and in terms of the construction, the gluing, it's I've had to come up with a lot of solutions to just sort of present myself with these construction problems, and for me a lot of the fun is figuring out how to make kind of make these things look somewhat effortless, but in the end it's through quite a bit of effort, and figuring out and failure in a lot of cases. But yeah, the glue, I use silicone glue. People are familiar with it. A lot of times it's used in like bathtub and tile applications, or window seals. And I've just learned at some point along the way, or developed some pretty specific ways to keep it really clean and keep it out from the inside.
Yeah, it's almost so clean that we take it for granted, almost, the skill level that's involved.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think in thinking about glass too, glass is a discipline that requires a lot of practice and training and discipline, and so I've always found that really appealing. That these things is sort of the last maybe 10 images we've looked at have really built on each other. Starting with that series of lighters. I mean that's even that is like not takes a little bit to put together. But then, each sort of step is like, okay, let me try something a little bit more challenging. And in this case, I mean, it is, these are highly crafted objects, but I'm also thinking about, what can I do with it? So, this is like CMYK, blue, the blue, magenta, yellow, and black. And it's kind of, it's its own color system, a way to identify the printing process, or it's the subtractive system for print making. So there is this sort of embedded information about communication, or how we understand maybe the artificial world, but we could consider that the natural world too. I kind of like that duality. And then these objects were, this piece was in the show earlier this year in Brooklyn, and it was a window gallery. And I liked how this work in particular sort of was positioned in relationship to this architecture, these skyscrapers really, and the reflection of the window. And then I think we're at the point, okay, so this is in Brooklyn. But this is work that's now in the Through a Glass Darkly show there at the Contemporary, and this work is you might not be able to see so well from this angle, but these are some of these like objects from this Echo series that then have been built into this larger installation. These sort of floating glass shelves, and it was built for this awkward little triangular space in that gallery that was most easily viewed, or the color wheel or spectrum was viewed really from outside. But this was sort of the peak you could get from inside the gallery. There was just like basically like shoulder width little gap you could squeeze your I could hold my camera over into and had to install within. But some of the ideas here, that portrait of Goethe, and even, if you think about the zoetrope work, there's sort of like this angle you find where the right image appears, is again called anamorphism. But that's something that's continued to interest me, and a lot of times when I do have an opportunity to put something bigger together, I'll I'll sometimes just default to using that technique. It's a little gimmicky, but in this case, sort of getting to incorporate more of the larger plastic collection, which has been collected, again, like about over a decade. And it's just like if I take a cap off of something, I throw it into a shoebox, and eventually it gets organized into a clear bin that's all the same color. But this is just sort of a sense of moving around it from the outside, and it's just been carefully constructed so that there's this moment in the middle where those colors sort of converge, or sort of expand out from sort of a negative color wheel in a sense. There's sort of a view of it. This is it in the Delaware contemporary space. It's very different in that space. I really wanted to see it. Jenna, we had many conversations about this. I was determined to see it in this space. Jenna, thank you again for helping me store it for so long. But I wanted to experience it, being able to walk around it, because it was really like confined in that other space. So for me, it's like it's really different. But I don't have a ton of pictures of it because I didn't have a lot of time to document. But this is, and then, oh, well, here's back in that other space. So one of the things is like this idea of a proper point of view, or like conveying a perspective. There's kind of something, there's a metaphor there about like, trying to see something from somebody else's point of view or perspective. And the truth is, I find with these sculptures and really with communication, more often than not, you're actually getting sort of a confused, jumbled information, because that desire to send a clear signal, which I certainly understand as an educator, is often, frankly, just impossible. But that's kind of the fun. So, I think I've come to embrace that these are, sort of about control, but also more so about chaos. And here, this is like, you can see that those objects are, incorporated in. I know I've been flipping through these quickly, but you've got time to go see this work at Delaware Contemporary if you haven't.
That's right. Our show is up there until December 31st, and we would encourage everyone to go see David's work in person, as well as all the other amazing artists in the show. This piece really feels so different in our exhibit than it did previously. And I'm sure that it's an interesting experience for you to just see how the work hits in different locations, be it the color of the floor, like you said, the width of the walls, the height of the walls, your perspective, really changes like how we see the work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll get to spend a little more time with it right before it gets deinstalled, but yeah, it's always curious to be a bit of a fly on the wall if you can be. So I've got a couple the other pieces in the show talk about here. So this work is also in the gallery. I think look for it. It's tucked back there. I think it's in a great place. It gets great lighting from a natural window there in that space. But this is called 48 Ivanhoe, and 48 Ivanhoe is the address, the street address that I grew up. And this is really specifically in reference to my mom. A lot of my work, in addition to maybe being about color or craft and found objects, are typically some kind of portrait. In this case, my mom passed away about 6 years ago, and it was unexpected. It was sudden. It was traumatic, as any passing of a family member is, and I one of the ways I coped was I took on the task of making a funerary urn among many other things. But what I found was, I really wanted to make sure it was like the right color and maybe my memory of what her favorite color was, or I had these color associations with my mom. So I started like sort of layering these commercially available colors, glass colors, trying to find something that was unique, that was really specific. And then over time, I found that, I was making sort of this library of colors, and that's how this idea developed. My mom was, also a voracious reader and instilled a passion for reading in me and my family. So, it felt right to sort of begin to build this library of these color samples. So this is the same way I was talking about making the handmade sheet glass before, where it's a cylinder and it's opened up, and all of this, including the clear, is this glass. And it for me, it's really about sort of trying futilely to access memory. Even thinking about the book, this sort of empty book space. This is the space around notable books from my library, maybe things I associate with my mom, but really just a collection of books that were meaningful for me. But this sort of like absence, I think, is refers to not only maybe the experience of losing somebody, but also just the experience of dealing with information, communication again. You could look at a book that you read and maybe not remember a single thing about it. At least that's that's my experience. So it's a little bit about that push and pull, trying to hold on to something. This is sort of an extended memorial in a sense, but I think also in a more general sense, sort of a meditation on memory. And one of the great things that happened for me, especially with the Delaware show, was my dad lives in Philadelphia, very close. I stayed with him when I was installing, and then he got an opportunity to help me install, and that allowed us to have this really sort of like nice moment, communicate about the work, where the work came from, why I made it. And for me, again, that was a really important sort of full circle moment, to share that with him in that space.
In moments like this, I always think for artists that it's great that we have an outlet like art to help us through these
Mhm.
tough times, and to find a way to almost make visual peace with the emotional disruption that we have, you in our lives. So it's really nice to see that in the work and hear the story, even though, of course, we, are sad for you. But I'm glad that you were able to find a way to create this memory through your artwork.
Yeah, no, it felt like I feel very fortunate that both, in a way, grief is a funny thing, because one of the things I found is that I relish sort of addressing it and talking about it, because it's one of the ways that memory can survive. And I can have a moment to think about my mom or talk about my mom, and the piece certainly behaves in that way. I think in going through it, it's like, I'm not like in it every second. I'm doing every last minute of like that process, but it is a nice way for me to sort of for myself, but also, yeah, again, for my family, to say like, here's one of the ways I'm able to sort of express my appreciation for her, and they can share in that too. So yeah, absolutely. I think I feel very fortunate that I have the outlet of making things, and I think a lot of what I do, and I imagine most artists, that is embedded in the meaning. It's like there aren't practical reasons to spend your time making visual artifacts in most cases. So it is sort of a symbolic act, and it's hard to communicate its importance. But anyway, you know, it's like the process is important. And you know, as a, you know, maybe, you know, more so a craft artist, I'm happy to talk about the process, but I think the process can be the meaning too. The process can, you know, can be the concept. So I try to forefront that somehow in the way I talk about the work. I'm not sure how well it comes through. I think this is the last slide that I have, which is the third piece in the exhibition, which is a piece I'm actually really excited about. I know less of how to talk about it, except to say that, you know, in building that last work, 48 Ivanhoe, there were these kind of colors that didn't fit into that spectrum, you know, and which was this, you know, that spectrum was like this certain palette, again associated with my mom, but this one was, you know, defaulted to more of the full spectrum. And I called it, you know, I kind of thought about them as outliers, and then I was thinking about that word outlier. I mean, it's a book, it's a Malcolm Gladwell book, so, you know, there's that sort of literary reference, as well as 48, you know, Ivanhoe is like a literary reference. But anyway, but also this idea of like the stained glass window and how the stained glass window functioned historically, and that in these cathedrals, it was really kind of a recruitment tool of sorts, you know, along with, you know, bread and wine. You know, it was kind of a way to convert people, or, you know, share a story with somebody, and just thinking about the power of projected color light. So for me, it's really important that, or an important step in building this this piece was cutting the bottom out of this shelf and seeing this sort of like this projection of the spectrum below it, and thinking again about like outlier, maybe outlier being somebody from the outskirts of a community, and coming into a central area, the type of area that would have, you know, grand architecture or a cathedral, and experience, you know, what at that time would be equivalent to, you know, some of the most advanced technologies that we have today in terms of communicating, whether that's like, yeah, you know, well, beyond digital imaging, but, you know, virtual reality, or some kind of, you know, thing that takes you into a different realm. So, you know, maybe I'm overstepping my bounds there, but I think this is like a sketch, hopefully, for things that might come, where I'm using more of the projected light to continue to reference modes of communication, both ancient or historical, and trying to reference contemporary or even future modes of communication.
Thank you so much.
There you go.
Really appreciate it. We're so excited to have your work in the show. I have to say, with the previous slide, I did see that slide personally, that work as a continuation of 48 Ivanhoe, as if you had selected memories on display for us. That's sort of how I saw that last piece, that these were like the highlights of the collection, so to speak, kind of displayed and presented as a continuation. You know, everyone has their own interpretation, so it's always good to hear what the artist has to say, and it's always good to bring our own interpretation to things as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you so much for sharing your work with us today.